you everyone for joining us. My name is Grace Edward and my pronouns are they, she. I am joining this webinar from Yagara in Turrbal country in Mianjin, Brisbane. And I would like to pass on to my fellow panelists and get them to introduce themselves as well. So, Cindy.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Cindy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the co-chairs of the lovely Youth Disability Reference Group. Yeah, and I'm coming here to you from Wurundjeri Wurrung land of the Kulin Nation down in Victoria. And yeah, lovely to be here. I'll pass on to Ash.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Ash. I use they, them pronouns. I am also joining from the lands of the Wurundjeri people and the Boon Wurrung people. And I will pass to Varsha.
Hello everyone, my name is Varsha. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming from Darragland in New South Wales. And I'll pass it to Markos.
Hello everybody, my name's Markos. I use the pronouns he and him, and I also live on Wurundjeri land, and I'm very excited for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the lands across Australia on which we are all meeting today, the lands of Australia's First Nations people, representing hundreds of clans, language groups. We recognise their continuing connection to land, sea and community. We respectfully acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and those who are joining us today. We work towards reconciliation with and self-determination for First Nations people of this country. We're all joining on Zoom webinar today, so your video and audio will be automatically off unless you are part of the panel. Auslan interpreters will also have their videos on today. Thank you, Sarah and Angela, for your assistance. The event is currently being recorded and shared live on Facebook stream. On Facebook stream, there'll be live captions automatically on there. We'll share this link with you in a moment. So Andrew will share the link on the chat. We are taking summarized notes and will be shared after the event with everyone who has registered. There'll be a discussion phase. If you'd like to submit questions at any time, click on the box with a question mark, and you can also upload your questions as well. The chat box can be used to share relevant comments and links related to the discussion. So use the chat box to ask any questions as well. We ask that you come to this space with empathy and an open mind. All of us on the panel and on the reference groups are sharing our personal experiences, and we do not represent everyone's view who is a person living with a disability. We're here to speak based on our personal experiences and our various disabilities. We're giving a content warning of ableism, mental health issues, and if the content we're sharing or discussing is distressing to you, please check the support, Kids Helpline, Q Life Australia, and 1-800-RESPECT, as well as Lifeline. Before we start our panel section, I'll pass on to Cindy to talk to you all about how we began the reference group and its purpose.
Yeah, so this webinar has been an initiative created by the YDRG, and we've been working on this webinar from kind of the planning stage. We conceived this idea a couple of weeks ago, and we've been working really hard to bring you this event, and we're really excited to present our ideas and thoughts on the topic. We've worked hard to make this group a reality, and we've had a lot of support from MYAN, particularly Swathi, the Youth Participation Officer. And this is only the beginning of the things we want to do in this space, kind of addressing the strengths, concerns, and opinions of young people with disabilities from culturally diverse backgrounds. So we're really excited to present our thoughts and opinions.
Thank you, Cindy. I'll now begin our panel discussion, and the first question is, what has life been like living with a disability? I'll pass on to Ash, Cindy, and Varsha for this one.
I can start. Yeah, it's a big question. You know, it's a very like integral part of like how I experience life. So I think a big part of living with disability, for me at least, has been a lot of denial. I honestly didn't even think to identify with it until my late teens. And I would just like pretend it didn't exist, as if like, you know, I wanted to, you know, you're a teenager, you just want to be like everyone else, or whatever that means. But I did have like an oddly okay school experience. Like I had an oddly good support system that was like willing to do things, adjust things for me, even if I was denying the fact that those adjustments were needed. And I think like one thing I want to say before we like go real into the panel is that like it's really easy to frame living with disability in like a negative way, especially talking about it in panels like this. And I want to like note that it's not. Like this is just my life. Like it's kind of a neutral thing for me. There's positives and negatives. And yeah, it is just how I live. Does someone want to go next to speak?
Yeah, no, I definitely like had a similar experience with Ash, even though I have a very visible disability growing up. I also had like a lot of denial. I kind of treated my disability as kind of like a separate entity to myself. And it was kind of a journey of like, yes, my disability is part of me, and I am like, it's part of my identity of acceptance and understanding that this is a part of me, and then having pride in it, and then it kind of forming a positive kind of sense of self instead of it being an other kind of negative other from myself. Yeah, so that's me.
Yeah, I kind of agree there, where the denial part of life was really pertinent for me. My disability is very apparent. It's a speech disability, which I didn't actually define as a disability until maybe the start of this year, or when I started uni last year. So I didn't really know what community I was in. I didn't really stand within a place of disability or not. It was quite grey, which is quite hard when you're young and you're trying to work out where to stand, who to seek for support, and work out your own identities within that space. Yeah, that was how it has been for me. I'm still in the early processes of really understanding it.
Markos, did you want to add to?
Certainly. I would say, and I've been saying for a few years, that it was a life of challenge and opportunity, because of course, being quite significantly, how do you say this, having mental issues, you could say, obviously comes with a lot of negativities, like the negative emotions, the anxiety, inability to make friends, and a lot of depression as well. But it's also been a life of opportunity, which I think is usually the case with neurotypical conditions. Having a unique way of looking at things, having passions and that you're willing to focus on and explore has actually led to some rewarding outcomes. So yeah, in that way, I think there can be some opportunities that come with the disabling problems. So I'm thankful, and I'm also, I also acknowledge that it's been hard as well. But yeah.
Well, for me personally, it has been, I've only just started talking about my disability, so it's coming from a place of living with it has been coming from a place of just adapting to how everyone else is doing things, because I guess for me, for a long time, no one's ever asked what accessibility needs do you have, what do you want in a space so you can feel comfortable. So that's the place where for me it has been. And in the sense of community, with what Varsha said, I feel like when Cindy and I first did that first webinar, we really connected, and we found a sense of, I guess, community within ourselves, and being able to share our experiences with each other, and wanting to create a bigger community where more people could join, and we could create a safe space for all of us. So our next question is on community culture and identity. And as a young person living with a disability, what are the expectations, or how have you felt within that, within your identity and your culture?
I can start this one. I think it was quite hard, I think, at the start, because it has been a thing which my grandparents and my auntie and my cousins as well had the same situation as me, and they learned to kind of push past that when they were quite young, which means I've kind of grown up in this fix-it culture, which I think is quite common in cultures that come from migrant backgrounds. My parents came here around 40 years ago, so they've come here and now they've grown a ton of the Australian values, except I think they still have this perception of you have to push through things, you have to work hard to kind of be beyond your hardship. And I think it was hard to explore those two spaces where I was taught kind of a mistake or like a bad time with my speech would be like a personal failure of mine, which is hard, but I think it is something that we have to talk about, where we have to redirect the conversation from being about particular cultures or a culture blaming, and just realize that there's like clear gaps as to where people learn things from and how they do, and bring it back down to the individual and kind of spread that awareness throughout different communities as well. I think is a really important part of now the work which I do.
Cindy?
Yeah, I definitely agree with not kind of blaming it on culture. And I think that kind of plays into how I experience my disability within my own culture and how that has formed my identity. Because I'm a second generation migrant. My parents came over in their mid-30s, so they've been here a little bit. And yeah, so in my kind of culture, I come from a Chinese background, and they kind of view disability as a burden on the parents, where it is the parents' fault that they have a child with a disability. So it's always on them whenever I like made a mistake or there was a hurdle to be kind of overcome. And so I was always sequestered away, and kind of it was on them to fix things. And I think that kind of bleeds into how I kind of connected with the kind of Chinese community, because I was sequestered away, I was never spoken about as a person with a disability. So it kind of stifled my ability to like identify myself as someone with a disability. And then that continues to play in like how I connected with community, because I wanted to go to said community or cultural event, can't go because I have a disability, because no one talks about it. And I think that's somewhere service providers can really kind of step in and shine, but we'll talk about service providing a little bit later. But yeah.
Yeah, I think adding on to both Cindy and Varsha, I had like a similar thing with the hard work, or like working to kind of get over things or overcome things, especially. My dad was a refugee, and he has a very big kind of mentality of being like, I got over these things. I had so many of these XYZ hardships. Everyone should be able to work through these things and things like that. And his whole family's a bit like that. And I think that definitely plays into the denial kind of thing that we were talking about before, in that, like, you know, I was confused as to if they could work through all these things, why can't I? Or like, if like that's what is kind of expected of me, why can't I like do this or that? And so yeah, I did identify like that disability as kind of a weakness early on, which is very like, yeah, internalized ableism, very ableist kind of ideas. And yeah, I also don't want to blame that on a culture thing. It's more like it's an experience, right? Like they had one experience and that's how they experience things in their family, and they're going to pass it on to their children because it worked for them. It helped them cope. But yeah, it really like bleeds into kind of the intersections of like youth, disability, and culture, and that like family things, and also kind of the perception of young people not being as wise. And so like you kind of just are expected to adopt your parents' kind of like thinkings and learnings and things like that until you're old enough to also have that wisdom. And that's also a very like, yeah, a thing in kind of Asian culture, especially, or at least for mine. And yeah, I think it's an interesting thing with the whole denial place of like finally coming to a space where I'm like, okay, I can kind of still work within my culture and still like, you know, play to how my family has coped with life, but also accept that, you know, this is my identity and it's not a bad thing, and I can just like, you know, adapt things to how I need them to be and things like that. So yeah. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, before I meant neurodiverse, not neurotypical. I'm sorry, but seeing 100 beautiful faces makes me nervous. Okay, but no, in terms of culture, being Greek, I felt like I was always expected to be loud and happy, particularly at family events, which was not the case at all for me. I was often depressed and quiet, and family members would make jokes at my expense, and I couldn't take the joke. I would always usually break down and leave. So yeah, I think in my case, my my mental issues and my culture very much clashed in a negative way, and that was quite hard. I also didn't and don't speak the language, so that also makes it hard. But I guess that's more a statement of my laziness than anything else. But yeah, so all sorts of cultures have all sorts of issues with this, and it's important to listen to all stories and to ask people what they go through. Thank you.
Thank you. Varsha, did you want to add anything?
No, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that for me, denial and culture blaming and the cultural expectations of within my own culture as well, very much like what Cindy said, within my culture, having a disability seen as something that is a curse or a burden on the parents, especially when in the sense that when in my culture, when your parents raise you, when you get older, it is then your responsibility to look after them in their old age. And it's seen that if you have a disability, then you can't really do that. But at the same time, I also want to add that sometimes the approach that is taken is that children have to be removed from their culture. When we're here in Australia, that children have to be removed from their culture to be able to provide them the proper support that they need. But it's mostly about education for all, for the young people who are going through that, are living with that disability, and for the parents who are their caretakers and looking after them. We'll move on to the next segment, which is on employment and education. And my question, actually, before we go on to that part, one more question on culture. How can we redirect and navigate the conversation about ableism away from culture blaming?
I can, oh, sorry, Ash, but I can kick this off a little bit, but I think, yes, partially like it's our experience within our culture. And that's a kind of fact and a matter of fact, like we can't really say this is the exact problem. And I think the shame and responsibility that a lot of kind of cultures experience around disability is there, and it is not up to kind of others outside the community to kind of point blame and say this is why this is wrong, and you should remove a child from their kind of culture because it's a huge part of someone's identity. And I think that kind of candid conversation around that is really important.
Yeah, I think I agree as well. It's quite important that we know that we're not just working between one culture and our disability. We're working within our culture, being Australian as well, and being young, and our disability, which is a ton of gaps in terms of where we stand and who we talk to and how different people see it. It's important to know that the things that we saw, especially during school and taught during that time, wasn't the exact same as the things that we were taught by our culture as well. So we were kind of taught like 3 or 4 different things at quite a young age. So we can't really put a blame on the specific culture, but rather the where it all intersects and where we kind of took from what we were taught and how we saw shame and denial and being young and all that would 100% contribute to how we've had to move through the world, for sure.
Ash, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, like, I think there's a thing to be said about kind of how ableism works with culture in a way that's not blaming the culture, but more almost putting responsibility on like the structures around cultures and around people just generally. And yeah, I think you see that a lot with like, you know, framing disability even as like a social thing, rather than like a personal kind of disability of the person themselves kind of thing. And I think that can be applied in a cultural context, so that the blame is not on the culture, it's on, you know, how that culture is situated in the world and the perceptions on that culture and the perceptions on the people within that culture. And yeah, and like addressing that rather than separating people from their cultures and things like that. Yeah.
And sadly, we live in a country so quick to blame and disparage other cultures different from the prevailing one in Australia. So I think that has to change as well. There should be more education across the board, more enlightenment, and we should understand each other instead of blaming on everything. So just a quick little point.
Thank you, Markos. Thank you, everyone, for answering that question. For anybody who's just joined us and wants to ask a question, we'll have a Q&A session after the panel discussion is done. There's a Q&A box right at the top of your screen, so you can drop your question in there, and I'll be able to view it later and ask the panel those questions. And yes, again, after the panel section is done, we'll take a 10-minute break and then continue on with the Q&A session. We'll move on to our next question now, which is on education and employment. And I know Varsha and Markos had a few reflections on this question. So what has your experience been like with education?
You can go ahead, Markos.
Okay. Well, I could spend all day on this, but I'll cut it down. I was certainly the victim of a school system that didn't fully understand mental issues. I'm talking about primary school and high school. Like in primary school, when I would usually isolate myself during recess, teachers thought that was me not making an effort to make friends, when it was actually me wanting to be in my own world. So that's what I preferred. And as well, there was bullying from kids, definitely in primary school and high school. In the high school, it was private and an all boys school. So there was a boys will be boys attitude, very competitive. So yeah, it was quite relentless. And as well, it manifested into physical conditions as well, as in I became quite obese. Then I lost the weight and became anorexic, and kids would then bully me for that. And the anorexia heightened the mental issues too. So it was quite bad. So and bullying was rarely punished as well. Even if a teacher saw it, they would usually just give him a stern word and that's it. But uni was okay. So I think this was the early 2000s. I think we're a lot better now. There's a lot more awareness, a lot more education on this. And I would hope that a lot of the all boys schools are improving, especially now there's been a lot of pressure on them to do so. So yeah, I just had to stick through it, and I'm glad to be on the other end, and I hope I can help make others have a better experience. So yeah, thank you. And also just quickly, sorry, these stories need to be told. So people who've had negative school experiences, the school should improve and the students should be heard. The schools shouldn't silence us. Yes, so speak up. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think when you're young, being in a education system is the most formative part of your life. And I was completely the opposite of Markos, where I went to an all-girls school, and it was an extremely supportive place. In fact, I got a ton of support from teachers and my peers, but as soon as I transitioned into tertiary education, it kind of became my own thing to take on. It became my responsibility to transition into a really hard new place all by myself. And you kind of have to know the processes and the bureaucracy of university quite in detail to push past the paperwork and the talks and all this to sort of get what you need. I found that a ton of the tutors and the lecturers were students as well, so there was kind of a lack of training there. And I think the hardest part is that when you come from a school where you had done quite well, and for my school, it was a particularly cultural school, because it was a selective one. So it became something where I was forced to take that mentality of being the perfect student and being kind of the marks and the grades, which at that point wasn't really important, while as well trying to work out where you stood. I think it was quite hard in that regard, and that transition periods for young people are hard by itself, and as soon as you bring in disability as well, it becomes a whole new park. Like, it becomes a whole new game where you have to really work through it yourself as a young person, and still do well and be okay, because we've been taught that by our cultures to push through it, because your sisters did, your parents did, and so that's kind of the mindset that I had while I tried to transition through that.
Can I? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Can I quickly add that I definitely see what Varsha has said, that there's such a mentality of like, you need to push through it. This person pushed through it, why can't you? And it's always that kind of comparative, like, this person can do it, why can't you? And it kind of like, for me especially, it bled through into my kind of supports, especially in education. So at school I needed a couple of supports, and because some of them weren't in place for some of my subjects, I didn't do so well in some, and of particular note was maths. I wasn't the best at maths. And the supports weren't there because those who were supporting me at school assumed I was good at maths because I was Asian, and I'm like, okay, that's not helpful right now. And then I didn't get help from my parents or the people around me, because it was again that mentality of they pushed through it, why can't you push through it? And yeah, it is that kind of assumption, and people assume things and then things don't get done, and then you kind of fall behind.
Ash, did you have anything else to add?
I mean, really quick, I think I just want to like relate all of that to kind of like the model minority mindset of like independence being a thing that people recognize, especially from, you know, Asian cultures in Western societies. Like, that's just a big thing that I think contributes to all of what you just said. Yeah.
Thank you. We are going to move on to our next section, which is service gaps. The question is, what would you like to say to people designing services for young people with a disability from diverse backgrounds? And what should services rethink when it comes to inclusive services for young people with a disability from diverse backgrounds? We'll kick off with Ash.
Yeah, so I think a big thing that I see with a lot of services is that this like expert mentality, in that, like, you know, this service specializes in one thing. Maybe it's migrant and refugees, or it's young people, and that is their specialty. And when you have that kind of expert mentality, like, we are good at this thing, we help people from this group, it kind of takes away from the fact that those people are not just that one thing. So someone is not just a migrant, or someone is not just a young person. And when services really like specialize and claim that, you know, that is what they're good at, that's kind of what it does. It does reduce people to that one thing, and they just address that one thing as if it's not intersecting with anything else, as if it's not affected by the rest of someone's life. And that's, yeah, something that I think embedding lived experience, of which I'm really for, can really help in this, in that, like, really getting, you know, young people's experiences, but not just young people that are disabled, young people from diverse backgrounds, into services that claim to be for young people. Like, that is what is needed, because then you're kind of embedding what people really need, what people really want, what, you know, you're looking at all of the facets of a person and embedding that into the service, rather than just being like, you know, we are good with young people, that is what we do. And yeah, I think that's something I see a lot with services, and that's something that is missing, is this kind of lens from the people that you are trying to support or serve or do things for. You need to bring them into the service to actually put out services that are for those people, which sounds like common sense to me, but it is a thing that is missing a lot, that I see a lot. And I think, yeah, really prioritizing and using lived experience, not just to validate other research, but using it as your evidence. That's really important as like a starting point to really like create services that are useful for people rather than just one part of that person. Yeah.
No, I totally vibe with Ash. You and me are on the same page. I definitely think lived experience is such an important thing, and it's definitely something that services should value. We are more than a commodity. Our experiences are valuable. And I think in this kind of conversation where I think services can really shine is kind of bringing the conversation away from kind of culture blaming, like what I have mentioned before, to kind of, instead of focusing on the individual, what they can do for the individual and what we can fix about the individual, which is kind of the medical model of disability, we can shift to more of a social model of disability, where what you want to focus on are what are the kind of structures around the individual that we can change and support. And that is something I really think a lot of services should invest in, especially within this kind of intersection between young people with disabilities from culturally diverse backgrounds, because one, we don't have many spaces like we have discussed. This is a very unique space, which is I'm very excited about. And the fact that this intersection can truly kind of help young people grow into their identities. And especially because young people from diverse backgrounds, a lot of the time don't have that much cultural sway, where their opinions within their culture are lesser because they are young. I can definitely attest to that as someone from an Asian background. Opinions of elders are more important than the young people, but we do have opinions, concerns, and we want to raise them. And service providers can definitely create that space where young people with lived experience can kind of shape services, provide their lived experience, and connect them with their culture. Because again, a lot of cultures kind of shy away from disability, and creating that bridge is definitely something lacking, because it's always about the individual, and we need to kind of expand that to create that individual's kind of support system and really strengthen that.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you guys. And I found when I was in therapy for speech, it was a really one size fits all approach. I had to drive 4 hours out and back for on days on end, for these intensive group programs, which were really awkward and really strange to be in a group of random people talking about your life. And it kind of forces you to be introverted when I wasn't. And it was a really his service for that account of people, so it will work for you. And at the times where it wasn't working, it was like, why can't it work for me? Am I like the person who it can't be for? And it's like, that's not how it works. It will work completely differently on each person. And for me, it became a thing of like, you need to do these services to fix it, for it to be like completely gone, for you to work on it being not a part of your life now. And I think that was a really harmful thing to grow up in, because you're taught that this thing was made for you, for it to be gone, and that's not what I think was healthy for me to learn at a young age. And I think what I personally believe is that services should try and minimize the amount of bureaucracy and paperwork and just the really small things that go, yes, this one thing will fit you, because it isn't a one size fits all approach that works for disabilities at all.
Yes, well said. And I only have one thing to say, really, but in terms of mental health services, I wish they'd put more emphasis on cognitive treatment to actually solve the underlying problems instead of just medication, which is a very effective bandage, but it's really just a bandage, and it's an expensive one too, especially for people who struggle to find work. So that's all.
Thank you. I agree completely with everything you've all shared, and especially also what Cindy shared about the social model. And when we were planning the webinar, I shared this reflection that services sort of need to look at providing care for a person in the same sense that parents do. You know, parents have to get to know their child, the environment they're in, which friends are positive influences for them, which friends are not so positive influences for them, and sort of educate the child slowly about what is good and what isn't. And I think that's the same approach services need to take. There are gaps of information and education that need to be provided for our parents and our communities and the structures that we're around, so our environment can be better suited to support us as young people living with disabilities or anybody else.
Sorry, Grace, can I just quickly add something on this topic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is such an important space for service providers, as any kind of intersectionality with young people is really important, because when services fail young people, there is like that internalization that, why is this service not working for me? Is it potentially something wrong with me? And that is a very toxic mentality that can be bred from the gaps that are formed within services.
Thank you for that important point, Cindy. We are now moving on to what is almost our last segment of the panel discussion. And the question is, what do you think about some of the changes forced by COVID-19? I'll pass on to Ash to start this one.
Yeah, obviously we have to talk about COVID as much as we want to avoid talking about it. But I think something that, I mean, especially in the disability community, that was seen initially when COVID, when lockdowns and things happened, was like the amount of flexibility that could happen. Like, it was frustrating to see that once it became a majority need, all of a sudden all of these changes could be made, all of these flexible adjustments could be made in like the school area, the work area, all of those kinds of things. And those are things that, disability advocates have been fighting for ages. And, they came around within a few weeks because now it was the thing that everyone was asking for. And there is now this kind of anxiety with things going back to whatever COVID normal is, that flexibility is going to be revoked in some way, or like, we are going to go back to normal, which was, an ableist normal that was hard to access. The flexibility wasn't there. And now that we know that it can work, right? Like working from home can work. And like, yeah, now that things are going back to normal, there's this anxiety for that to like disappear all of a sudden, which I'm really hoping doesn't. I'm really hoping people and services realize that, this is something that makes you more accessible. This is something that makes the world more accessible. And that is something we should keep, and not, it shouldn't disappear once COVID disappears. I think also like something that has come out of COVID is this understanding of competing access needs. I think for people that never really had to think about that before, it kind of came to light with COVID. So I don't know if like things like people being able to work from home versus people finding that really hard, and trying to work around that and adapting. So like that worked well for a team. I know for me also, like Zoom has made it a lot easier for me to ask for adjustments. Like if it's a hard speaking day, there's a chat function right there. I can just be like, I'm just going to use the chat today. That's cool. Whereas for some people, Zoom is a lot harder to, you know, be able to perceive people's social kind of expressions and things like that. And yeah, I think people have really seen that and like kind of are recognizing that there are differences in how people can interact with the world, and that we can actually adapt to that and like be able to work with everyone's diversity, and like make adjustments and make changes and do things so that everyone can work the best that they can. And yeah, I think that's something that came out of COVID that, you know, should really be something that extends for, you know, forever in time and keeps developing. And yeah.
Markos?
Yeah, well, I define the impact that COVID-19 has had on Australia in this way. Australia has been sent to its room to think about what it's done. Yes, so, and in this time of reflection, of deep thinking, I like how it's led to some very direct action on financial support, homelessness, health, and online misinformation, all sorts of things. And there's a lot of research and policy work that's been done, which benefits us all. So like Ash, I hope that continues and hope this new outlook, this new way of doing things stays. And I hope there's no more masks going forward, but I'll wear them if I have to. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final question for our panel discussion today is, how would you describe your ideal world? Cindy, we'll start with you.
That's such a hard question because I've always lived with the disability, and it's just so unfathomable because there's always like, oh, you can't do this, oh, that's a barrier there. And yeah, so I think having kind of, in an ideal world, I would love a kind of inclusive, supportive community in which there are no barriers, and that I have equal opportunity to any other able-bodied person, even though our society says on the surface that we do not discriminate against people with disabilities. There is always that underlying kind of discrimination that lies under the surface, and unless you do have a disability or very aware of it, it's invisible to the naked eye.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add on to that to say that, like, you know, like what world do I want to live in? That's like a very big thing that, like, there are so many changes that I'd probably make. But I think maybe a first step to it, I might go back to the whole lived experience thing and like embedding that into our world. So like not just services and not just, you know, what we were saying before, but like in everything, really listening to the people that like whatever space is for, or whatever activity it's for, like actually going out and having those people develop that, having those people run it, like not just advising on it, like they are like an integral part of whatever it is that's happening. I think that's something that could really make big changes and big leaps in how we kind of do stuff in the world, right? Like it's not just for people, then it's actually about them. Yeah, and I think that's like a first step in.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think it's quite hard to define what one world could be for every individual as well. I think we do have to understand that there's so much complexity when it comes to being a diverse person, which we all are regardless of our experiences. But the world I would want to see is one that we're all listened to, and that we're all paid attention to, and that we stop using the band-aids that we do and create change which is more deeper than that. And we are part of the decisions which are made about us and for us, I think, is the largest part of that, because so much of the time young people are just not put in the conversations of policy or the services which are created for us, and so we don't get what we need from them. So I think we all have to just work on trying to place importance on every voice that comes from these discussions and learn from them, and allow them to be a real part of the change is what I'd love to see.
And speaking for myself, I'm a fact guy. I tweet facts, I do research and writing and stuff like that. I'd love to see the end of the misinformation epidemic. Right now, there's a galaxy of websites, of newspapers, TV shows that just spread lies and spread misleading, distorted truths. And it's really destroying so much. You know, it's led to a lot of COVID deaths, a lot of people who ignore the rules. And we've seen that in America as well. And it also underpins a lot of the hatred towards cultures that we're seeing, a lot of the misunderstandings between people. So if there's some way just to snap my fingers and make all those negative actors go away, that'd be amazing. I think the world will be much more enlightened, much more peaceful and successful place. So maybe one day.
Thank you everyone for sharing your reflections on what is your ideal world. This brings us to the end of our panel discussion, but I also just want to pass back to the panel. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to the discussion that you didn't get to say?
Grace, you haven't said what your ideal world was.
Thank you. I haven't had much time to think of that, but definitely I think the worlds you've all described would also be my ideal world. And in terms of COVID-19, like what Markos said, we've all been given time out to reflect and really think about how we've been going about, whether it's providing service, living our lives, reflecting on ourselves and self-growth. And I think if we move forward with carrying that forward and trying to make the world more inclusive and more accessible for all, that would be my ideal world. Yes, but did anybody have any final thing they wanted to add to the panel discussion today?
Yeah, I did. I kind of forgot to mention this somewhere along the lines, but as disabled young people, we want to enjoy ourselves, and we are not kind of these robot machines that don't find enjoyment in life, and we might need supports to enjoy those things we want to enjoy. And I think a lot of services need to remember that we are young people and we like to do X, Y, and Z, and we would like support doing that, because that would be a really boring life if we didn't do the things we loved.
Ash?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to reflect that in that, like, yeah, a lot of services do just kind of like they address the life stuff, right? Like the bare minimum of what gets you to be able to be whatever independent is in whoever's eyes. And I think a big part of independence is being able to like have fun for yourself, like actually having like the ability to go out and do the things you want to do and do them like meaningfully, right? Like not just go there and realize that you cannot access it and then have to leave. And like those are things that, yeah, should be an emphasis in this ideal world. That should be like a thing that comes soon, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, and the fact that 100 people were willing to come and listen to us is really promising, really encouraging. And I hope you take all this information with you and you go forth and be the amazing people I know you are already. Thank you.
Varsha?
No, I think it's all been said.
Thank you. I think my final thing to add would be that it isn't just about making services and our community safer and more inclusive or accessible for everyone. It's about other industries as well, and especially looking at the art sector, which that's my career, that's where I practice as well. So making that space more inclusive and safe and accessible for everyone to be able to go and watch a show, to be able to participate in creating a show, to be able to share their story on stage, because when we share our stories, we gain more understanding of each other and our various intersections. Thank you all for joining us today and listening to our perspectives. And as Markos said, it's very encouraging. So I also hope that you take what you've heard today forward and that it will help you in your various roles.
Grace might be frozen.
Maybe we'll.
I'll the next part is just a quick break. We're going to take a 10-minute break. I highly encourage everyone in the audience to go away, to digest the information, get hydrated, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. We're all of us on screen will have our cameras off, so you won't miss anything. And yeah, so break time.
And we're coming back to do the Q&A part.
Yes.
So that will be what will happen after the 10-minute break, which will be.
So come back and listen to us.
And we have your questions kind of recorded, and we'll address them in 10 minutes. Awesome.
And if you would like to ask things, there's a Q&A, a box just below on your screen. So just put them through there.
If your question has already been asked on the thing, you can upvote it so it comes up to the top, and we know that quite a few people want us to answer that question.
Awesome. We'll see everyone in 10 minutes. And hopefully Grace comes back at that point.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking that break with us and joining us back. We did plan this session with a break just to give everyone on the panel a moment, a little breather before we come back and answer all the questions. And we'll start our question time in a moment. I'll just give everyone a chance to come back. Okay, so our first question is there another term besides disability that you prefer?
As in, like, for ourselves, or just generally? Sorry.
No, go ahead, Ash.
I was just going to say, like, I think it's important to, one, use the words that people identify with in general, but I think there is something to be said about people that are afraid of using the word disability as if it's a bad thing or it's like something that we should hide. Yeah, I think it's just, I find it kind of weird when people like kind of go around the word disability and go through like, you know, oh, they're just like differently abled or something, as if, you know, disability, the word itself, is some sort of insult, when it's not. It's just like, you know, a thing. And yeah, so I mean, I prefer, I do know that some people do have different words that they prefer, and that's totally okay if you yourself are identifying with different words. But I do think that the word disability is not bad in any way and should not be treated as such.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Sorry, Varsha, did I cut you off? Yeah, no, and there's like even in the disability community, there is a lot of discussion on how to use the word disability, whether it's person first language or identity first person language, identity first language, sorry. So it's either, I personally use person first language, so a young person with a disability instead of a disabled young person. However, that's my own personal kind of preference, and I've gone on that kind of journey of coming to that kind of conclusion, and every person with a disability or disabled person has their own preferences and own kind of mentality behind that. So yeah, just be aware and ask questions respectfully, and we'll answer. We're not going to bite. Hopefully not, at least.
Yeah, I agree with Ash as well, is that I was always scared of the term because I didn't realize that I actually had one. So I think when people are afraid of the term, it could be just a form of hidden shame as well. But at the same time, I think we are in this really like PC culture where we don't want to offend a ton of people, which is very fair enough. So just ask. Yeah, just I think that's a huge thing in my life, is that no one has asked me about the things that I would like to know, or like that they don't know. It's okay to not know. Of course, you wouldn't know if it isn't your life. So fair enough. We don't mind answering questions about how we would like to be referred to at all, and it'll be a personal thing.
Nothing to add. Very well said by everyone.
Thank you. Our second question is, can you give an example of when you felt truly included and catered for?
I appreciate this question a lot, because a lot of kind of the conversation around disability, it's always what's not working. And I think to kind of progress and change, we need to acknowledge what is working. And yeah, so that's why I really appreciate this question. However, it is still hard to answer. Yeah, does anyone want to go while I like think about this?
I mean, yeah, okay. So like the world isn't perfect and things like that. But I think one example I work in a pretty disability friendly, I guess you could call it, workspace where, you know, they do ask you and like do check in with you on like, you know, what is going to be accessible, what's not going to be accessible. And they're pretty flexible for, you know, days where you just like cannot do the things. And I think flexibility is my biggest thing with spaces that I have found inclusive, is that like they recognize that every day is not the same, and that I'm one day I might be able to do something and the next day I might not be able to, and they don't question that. It's just kind of like, okay, that's a thing for you and that's what's happening, so we will work with that. And I think that's like what I've appreciated most in spaces that I've found inclusive.
Yeah, I would say my answer would be the Mental Health Foundation of Australia. I volunteered for them for a couple of years, and I just think it's very welcoming. It's such a diverse group in terms of mental disabilities, in terms of culture and nationality. Everyone just gets on so well and they understand each other, and you can say all sorts of unusual things and nobody will react. You know, everyone just accepts each other and their differences. So yeah, very good place.
Yeah, so I actually had a really great experience with uni. So when I enrolled at university, I didn't need to kind of find someone to say, I have a disability, please help me. They came to me, and it was very obvious in like the enrollment, and all the faculty at my university are very kind of aware of kind of the disability services that the university provides. And so there is that kind of level of awareness and understanding, which I really appreciate, as well as, I had another example, but then I forgot, but oh well. Varsha, did you have anything else to add?
I think Zoom has actually been the most included I have been in class, in particular. For reference, I do a degree in politics, so everyone loves to talk. Everyone loves to talk, and I think in-person classes in the first term or first 2 terms, I didn't talk at all, just because it was so new. It was so scary. I didn't know anyone, and it's been like 2 years now, and in Zoom, I feel so okay to ask things. I'll put it in the chat if I want to. I'll just put my hand up. You can't actually see me when I'm talking, which helps significantly. I'm in my pajamas, which also helps. So yeah, I really have enjoyed that new addition to life at uni, for sure.
So those were the pre-submitted questions, and now we'll move on to the questions that were asked during our panel discussion. And thank you to those who have submitted questions. And if you do have a question, please submit it in the question and answer box, and we'll try to get through. We do have limited time, so if we don't get through your question, we'll try and get back to you with a response somehow. Thank you. So our next question is, what practical things can service providers do to make you feel more safe or comfortable when engaging with you?
I think asking. Is that like too simple of an answer to be like,
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Like it's great and all to have like a general kind of access framework or something like that, but yeah, I think something that we've emphasized throughout this whole webinar is like, we are individuals, and there are all those intersections of, you know, cultural background, being young, all of that. And so yeah, just having ways to ask that are like, you know, individualized to that person, so they understand what you can offer and what you can change. Offering up examples, because it is hard to be like, I need this, when you're not quite sure if that can be done in whatever context. So it is nice to be able to like have some feedback from the service provider to be like, you know, we can do this, this, and this, and this. Do you want us to do any of that? Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think coming into the conversation with young people with an open mind and not having kind of preconceived ideas what they should have, and treating them as kind of functional human beings. Yeah, we don't want your kind of ideas imposed on us. We have our own opinions and what we want. So yeah, coming to us with an open mind and not assuming what we want.
Yeah, I think also we are in the end like a type of client in this regard. So we're not just like a statistic. We're trying to come for a particular service, so it should be tailored to the things that we need. I think it is quite hard to search for practical things which can be applied to all situations, but to make a situation more comfortable, just start a very candid dialogue, allow space for us to be vulnerable. We do have to share things which are very personal to us to ask for the things that we need, and it's hard because this is our lives, this is how we live, and it is not hard. I mean, it's not easy to talk about, so just creating a vibe that allows us to know you, and personable sort of things are quite nice. Talking to people who care and want the things for us that we want as well can create a vibe of, we're allowed to be here and ask for what we need. It's really important.
Yeah, and just quickly to the community workers, even if you're having a bad day, don't take it out on us. Please just be patient and kind, because people like us can't always handle negative attitudes and things like that. So yeah, I guess that goes for every sort of worker in every place. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes with a bit of a reflection at the start, so I'll just read it all to give context. This person has said, "Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. It's clearly difficult to identify with your disability and working against the fix-it mentality and moving towards a place of acceptance and inclusion within culture and society. My question is around how this work happens for people with an intellectual disability, the most common disability for young people, who may find it more difficult to comprehend all of these factors and self-advocate."
That's a really good question, and not one I think we can particularly talk about as, or me, I can't because I don't have an intellectual disability. But I think it is important for them to have support systems in place that allow them to advocate for what they need. I think that's kind of all I can talk to there, but the people around would be the most important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Varsha. I can't personally speak to this. I do not have an intellectual disability, but I have worked in the sector supporting and advocating for people with intellectual disabilities. And I think one of the most important things that I learned from that experience is that kind of a lot of people with intellectual disabilities don't really have a wide support system. That it's very close-knit, mainly because our current system, we tend to segregate young people with disabilities. So if you have a severe intellectual disability, you tend to go to a special school, and at that special school you only interact with other people who need that kind of support, and so you only associate with a certain type of people. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we do want to kind of expand their knowledge, and more people more people you interact with, the better, right? And so I think kind of making sure that people, especially young people with disabilities, I know that a lot of young people with intellectual disabilities find it difficult to make friends because they are always kind of segregated from the mainstream where where they can network and create support systems. So definitely kind of integrating and not segregating people with intellectual disabilities.
Yes, and there's an American man named Frank Stevens who he has Down syndrome. He did a speech for the Congress in the US about his rights and all that. It's really amazing. So I hope there are more of those people who have the charisma and the confidence to come forward and say what they need and tell their story. So yeah, Google him if you can, Frank Stevens.
Thank you. Ash, did you have something to add, or are you happy for me to move to the next question?
Yeah, I think everyone has said some great things, so yeah.
Thank you. Our next question came through via the Facebook live stream, and this person has said, "I'm interested in your thoughts on how well you saw your parents being supported in parenting as you were growing up."
I think this is a really awesome question because it's really hard to talk about this without being like, wow, this sucked. But of course we don't blame our parents. Like I know that my parents had done the most that they could within their context as well to support me and be there for me when they had 3 children and only me had this disability. I was supported through this really well. and from a really young age as well. And I think it's important when we talk about things like parents and culture that we're talking about things that contributed rather than blaming or like being part of, I guess, a problem. It's about the awareness and about the experiences that we intergenerationally take along with us. Yeah, and I think it's important to also acknowledge that they had done so much in that regard.
Yeah. And I think like adding to that and thinking about watching my parents be supported as parents kind of thing. That's an interesting question in that, like, yeah, when you do like grow up, you do look at your parents and go, you know, like, what do they do by themselves and what do they need help with and all of those kinds of things. And yeah, I think my parents were really independent. They were really like, you know, we are going to parent these kids on our own, we're going to do it really well, and they did, like they did a great job. But I think that's like something that I also adopted in the whole like I can do this all by myself kind of idea. And like, you know, you don't need help because I mean, I'm not a parent, but I do have two really, really young siblings of 1 and 3, and like just yeah, there is this kind of like feeling where you have to be the best at taking care of them in some way and like not need to be helped in any way. And that would be an awesome like kind of cultural thing to break down, to be like, you know, you can accept help, like you don't need to prove yourself. Parenting is hard, kids are hard. There are going to be things that you don't know what to do. And yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see more support for parents and parents be more open to support. And I think that would carry down to the kids in a way too.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's that kind of like you must be an impenetrable like tank moving through society. Yeah, I saw my parents. I don't think look, when I was younger, I started becoming kind of a self-advocate at like a very young age, mainly because my parents weren't very supported, in terms of language barriers, as well as kind of like time commitments. So they worked full time to support us. So it kind of landed on me to like advocate for myself about things relating to my disability. So yeah, if my parents got more support in that capacity, it would take a lot off me as a kid and then let me become like have more time to be a kid, I guess.
Yeah, well, my parents didn't need much support per se because my issues were comparatively easy to handle. But I was one of 3 kids, and my brother and sister were fine, you know. So I think that sort of helped them to relax in a way. So only 1/3 of their children had issues of any sort. So yeah, I guess yeah, it's hard for everyone. I think you just need to try and be as happy as you can. Try and look on the bright side. And when you grow up, try and make them as proud as possible to make up for the difficulties that came before. So that's all.
Thank you. Our next question submitter has a few questions, so I'll just go through them one by one. The first question is, how do you tell if a person with a disability is ready to talk about their disability without risking embarrassing or making them feel patronized?
Probably don't ask until they tell you. If it's a person that you don't know, is a pretty standard rule in terms of all things that is personal to a person, is you kind of wait for them to tell you. But if they're like your really close friend or a family member who you know they want someone to talk to, then just ask is probably where it would be. And just you should ask with the outcome of listening Yeah, that's what I'd say.
I think also kind of coming to the conversation in a kind of very specific way in if you're kind of a service provider or if you're put in a position where you have to talk about disability. I think coming to the conversation of from the perspective of how can I help you, or like an observation of like you might be I've seen that you've been kind of struggling with X, Y, or Z, instead of this is what's wrong with you, I think is a very kind of common sense thing, but sometimes it might not be so obvious.
So I'll move on to the next question if no one else wants to add to that one. Yep. So the next question is, how do you offer help to a migrant young student with a speech impairment if that person does not think he needs help?
I mean, I assume I'll answer this one, but yeah, I wouldn't force them into things that they don't want to do. If they say they don't need it, then just respect that. And I think just put a hand there to say, like, I'm there if you need it. But if they don't, isn't to that for sure.
I think just quickly adding on to that is I think that like can be broadened out to like just the wider disability community, in that like a lot of services just kind of assume people need these things, and that's a big thing and like that's a big thing for people living with disability, because it's like you get that choice taken away from you. People just like assume you need support with this. You don't get to choose to do it independently. You don't get to try if you want to try, and that's a big issue, to like take someone's independence away from them in like assuming they need help, and just kind of like taking those steps without that person's consent in any way, of being like, you know, they didn't want that, they didn't ask for it. Maybe like, yeah, offering a hand to be like, you know, it's there if you need it, but not going to the, you know, now you're going to go to this and this and this because we think that's what's right for you.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next question, and quite a long one as well. Joe has written, I am an advocate with Advocacy for Disability Access and Inclusion in South Australia, and my team is specifically funded to help people who want to be involved in the Disability Royal Commission. We are happy to tailor our service to meet the needs of an individual. Our challenge is letting people know we are here to help, particularly people from cohorts who may experience multiple barriers, for example, disability and culture and youth and or others. Do you have any advice on how we can get the word out so people know about our services and use it?
This is a really good question, I think, because there can be a ton of things which exist that people with a disability just don't know exist, and if people don't know it, then they can't ask for it. And I think this is also particularly important in unis or in schools, where you might see that you need a service and don't realize that it's there. I would personally, if you're targeting young people, use social media a lot, because that's where we find everything, to be honest, and that's where it's a place where people are very comfortable to share their advocacy and activism as well. So that would be the main place I would go first.
This might be a bit of a Debbie Downer, but potentially those who you're kind of seeking out to promote your service to might not necessarily be ready to talk about their disability if those like barriers are in place, say like culture or disability. Yeah, I don't like, sometimes people, especially young people, might not be ready to kind of confront those kind of experiences around their disability. And I think if you're kind of forcing something like the Disability Royal Commission into their face, it can be kind of triggering or distressing, just to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I've worked in the marketing team for a few different organizations. So I've got some advice, maybe just try and get a famous person on board to talk about it publicly. That can get the word out. Or you know, try and get a viral moment, you know, something interesting and conversation starting. But one of the best bits of advice I heard was the best way to become famous or to make it is be so good that they can't ignore you. So just focus on your service and do the best work you can. And I'm sure in time it'll get out there. Yeah, so that's really a good thing I would say.
Thank you. I'll ask one more last question before we end our question and answer time. And this question is asking, may I ask whether the panelists have any advice for community workers to be better and engaging? How could the youth worker better engage with young people, better engage with young people with disability?
I think like I think we've talked about a lot about like individualizing services and not doing the whole like one size fits all thing. And I think that applies here too, of just like listening to the young person, recognizing that they are a young person, but they're also more than that, is important. It's just like, yeah, like that goes into recognizing cultural backgrounds, recognizing, you know, how their disability relates to their identity as a young person or something like that, and just kind of like working with them as all of those facets of their being. And yeah, I guess I guess it's not that helpful for like a whole like approach to working with people, but it is like important to see the person as the person, and not as all their little bits.
Yeah, and I think to those kind of social workers or community workers, think about when you were young, you like did things that you enjoyed and were specifically you did because you were young. Yeah, we also want to do that. We want to do things like go to parties potentially, or do X, Y, and Z because we enjoy it, and it's not something that we it's like a basic survival thing, but for a young person it is, because it is something that kind of rejuvenates us. And I think that also plays into something that I want to talk about is self-care, and that sometimes as disabled young people or young people with disabilities, we might need support in kind of self-care and kind of taking care of ourselves mentally. So keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. We have one more question that has gotten a lot of votes, and I might just ask this one very quickly if we can keep our responses as short and concise as possible before we wrap up. And this person has asked, how were you able to have conversations with your family and navigate those cultural misunderstandings about disability?
This one is a hard one to keep short, but I think it's important to know that they don't come with bad intentions to these conversations. Kind of learn, hit them at the same time, like talk about your life and their life and just be candid with them, is what I'd say. I had it okay because I had some people in my family with the same thing. So it was not a taboo as such. That's a really quick version of a very long conversation.
Yeah, no, that's something I'm definitely working on. Yeah, I've kind of come to it in the sense that their kind of preconceptions or their view of my disability are going to be quite entrenched in their beliefs because they have kind of overcome these barriers as parents through these kind of mentalities and kind of consciously or subconsciously that they think, oh yes, if this kind of mentality has worked previously overcoming these barriers, then they have to be right because it's worked so far. So kind of dismantling that or kind of changing their perspective of that is difficult, and it is kind of hard, especially if you come from a family or a culture where you don't really speak about these things, and so you don't really know what kind of language to use, what kind of attitude to go into this by. So that's something I'm definitely working on personally.
Thank you. That's all we have time for. I'll throw to Nadine Liddy from MYAN to say a few words.
Thank you, Grace. I think I'm just saying, wow. And I'm thinking that if we were in a face-to-face context, I suspect, if I can boldly suggest, there might be a lot of rah-rahing and maybe even some standing ovation. So really big applause to all of you. But really, I want to say a huge thanks for your courage and honesty. It's not easy to be on a stage, online, face-to-face, regardless. We've had over 100 participants in the webinar today. It's not easy to come together and share publicly your perspectives on life, the world, being young, being from a culturally diverse background, having a disability, and all that means about who you are as individuals. So a really huge thanks. Well done, guys. It's been wonderful to listen to you all for the last hour and more, and we look forward to hearing more from you. I think you're an unstoppable force now, actually. Back to you, Grace.
Thank you, Nadine. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today and for sticking with us through all the technical difficulties and staying with us through the break. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for being so courageous and sharing your personal stories and perspectives as well. And thank you for all your great and insightful questions. If we didn't get to answer any of your questions, please send them through to myan.org.au. That will be dropped in the comment section. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to my beautiful team.
Thanks, Grace, for the wonderful moderation.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
And to the Auslan interpreters, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd also like to thank the Auslan interpreters and the team from MYAN. You don't see them, but they are there. So thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Swathi, for being on WhatsApp with us, talking us through all of this and helping us with putting all of this together. Thank you so much. Bye.
Hopefully we'll have more of these to come.
Yes, there is more to come from this space and from us.
Bye.
So keep your eyes open.
Thank you all for joining us.